The Effective Executive, by Peter F. Drucker. Introduction. He was a man who never wanted the job. He was a farmer, a haberdasher, a man who, by his own admission, wasn't the smartest or the most charismatic person in the room. Yet, when history called upon him in the final, chaotic months of World War II, Harry S. Truman stepped into the presidency and became one of the most effective leaders the United States has ever known. When he first took office, Truman had a clear idea of what he wanted to do. He wanted to finish the great social and economic reforms that had been started before the war. That was his passion. That was his plan. But then he asked a simple, profound question. A question that would change the course of his presidency, and indeed, the world. He didn't ask, "What do I want to do?" He asked, "What needs to be done?" And the answer was unavoidable. The world was shattered. Foreign affairs had to come first. So, this man from Missouri, who knew very little about global politics, started every single day with tutorials from his secretaries of state and defense. He put his own agenda aside and focused on the one contribution that only he could make. The result? The Marshall Plan, which rebuilt Europe and sparked 50 years of global economic growth. The containment of communism. A legacy of staggering effectiveness. Truman's story isn't just a history lesson. It's the perfect illustration of one of the most powerful books ever written on personal achievement, The Effective Executive by the legendary Peter F. Drucker. Drucker was not just some academic in an ivory tower. He was a consultant for over 65 years, a confidant to the world's top CEOs, presidents, and nonprofit leaders. He had a front-row seat to what worked and what didn't in the real world. And in all those years, observing countless leaders, he came to a startling conclusion. Effectiveness has almost nothing to do with charisma, intelligence, or talent. He wrote that in all his time, he never came across a single natural, not one executive who was born effective. Instead, he discovered that effectiveness is a discipline. It's a habit. It is a set of simple, learnable practices that anyone, and I mean anyone, including a young person just starting out, can master. This book has sold millions of copies and has been a guiding light for leaders at companies like Amazon, Intel, and General Electric for one simple reason: its lessons are timeless and they work. So, my promise to you today is this: by the end of our journey together through this masterpiece, you will understand the 5 essential practices that separate the people who are merely busy from the people who are truly effective. You will learn the secret to transforming your hard work and your good intentions into real, meaningful results. This isn't about working harder. It's about working smarter on the things that truly matter. This is the art of getting the right things done. Book summary. So, what is an executive? When you hear that word, you probably picture someone in a corner office, a CEO of a big company. But Peter Drucker had a much broader, and frankly, much more empowering definition. He said an executive is any knowledge worker, a manager, or an individual professional who is responsible for a contribution that materially affects the organization's ability to perform and get results. In today's world, that's almost everyone. It's the student leading a group project. It's the software developer writing code. It's the young marketing assistant figuring out a social media campaign. If you are expected to use your mind more than your hands to get a job done, you are an executive. And your job is to be effective. But there's a problem. A huge one. The very reality of our lives and our work seems designed to make us ineffective. Drucker identified 4 realities that are constantly pushing us off course. First, your time is not your own. It tends to belong to everybody else. Your phone buzzes, a friend needs help, a teacher sets a surprise deadline. Second, you are forced to keep operating, just dealing with the crisis of the day, rather than thinking about tomorrow. Third, to be effective, you need other people to use your contribution, but those people are often in other departments or areas, and you have no direct control over them. And finally, you are stuck inside your own world, your school, your company, your team, and you slowly lose touch with the outside world, which is the only place where results truly exist. We get caught up in being busy. We mistake activity for achievement. We become very efficient at doing things, but they might not be the right things. Drucker gives the perfect example: an engineering department that rapidly turns out beautiful, detailed blueprints for the wrong product. That's perfect efficiency, but zero effectiveness. So how do we break free? How do we become effective in a world designed to distract us? Drucker says it begins with the first of 5 practices, the very foundation of effectiveness: learning to manage your time. But not in the way you might think. He says effective people don't start with planning. They start with a simple, humbling diagnosis. They find out where their time actually goes. There's a fascinating story Drucker tells about a company chairman who was absolutely certain he spent his time equally in 3 areas: with his senior executives, with important customers, and on community activities. He was a man who prided himself on his memory. So, they did an experiment. For 6 weeks, his secretary kept a detailed log of everything he did. The result was a complete shock. The record showed he spent almost no time on those 3 key areas. Instead, his memory had tricked him into believing he was doing what he should be doing. In reality, he spent most of his day acting like a dispatcher, chasing down orders and calling the plant about tiny details, most of which were running smoothly anyway. He was interfering, not helping. It took several more time logs to finally convince him that when it comes to time, you cannot trust your memory. You must trust the record. This is the first step for anyone who wants to be effective. For just a few weeks, you log your time. Not from memory at the end of the day, but in real time, as you do it. A simple notepad will do. The goal isn't to judge yourself, it's just to see the truth. Once you have that record, Drucker says, you begin the second step: managing your time by asking a few diagnostic questions. First, you look at your time log and ask of every activity, what would happen if this were not done at all? And if the honest answer is nothing, you stop doing it. It's amazing how much of what we do is simply habit, things that would never be missed. The second question is, which of these activities could be done by someone else just as well, if not better? This isn't about being lazy. It's about recognizing that as an executive, you are paid to do the things that only you can do. The only way to get to your most important work is by letting go of everything else. And the third, and perhaps most courageous question, is to ask the people around you, what do I do that wastes your time? To ask this question requires humility, but it is one of the fastest ways to improve the effectiveness of your entire team. After you've eliminated the time wasters, you arrive at the final and most crucial step of time management: consolidating what Drucker calls your discretionary time into large, continuous chunks. He argues that to do any meaningful knowledge work, whether it's writing a report, thinking through a strategy, or preparing for a big presentation, you need a significant, uninterrupted block of time. Trying to do it in 15-minute bursts between classes or meetings is useless. You spend the whole time just trying to remember where you left off. As he puts it, small dribs and drabs of time are no time at all. Drucker tells the story of a highly successful bank president he worked with. Their meetings were always an hour and a half, never more, never less. When Drucker asked why, the president explained that he had discovered his own attention span was about 90 minutes. Any longer, and he'd start repeating himself. Any less, and he couldn't get deep enough into a topic to truly understand it. During those 90 minutes, there were no interruptions. His secretary had strict instructions not to put any calls through except from the President of the United States or his wife. As he said, The president rarely calls, and my wife knows better. I have yet to come across a crisis which could not wait 90 minutes. This man had mastered the secret. He consolidated his discretionary time into usable blocks where he could be truly effective. Whether you do this by working at home one morning a week, or by scheduling all your meetings on 2 days and keeping the other 3 free for deep work, the principle is the same. Find your discretionary time, and then protect it fiercely. Mastering your time is the foundation. But it's just the beginning. Once you've created these blocks of productive time, you have to answer a much deeper question. What do you do with that time? This brings us to Drucker's second practice, focusing on contribution. The effective executive, he says, is constantly looking up from his work and outward toward goals. He is always asking the question, what can I contribute that will significantly affect the performance and the results of the institution I serve? Notice the language. It's not what is my job. It's not what are my tasks. It's what can I contribute. This one small shift in wording changes everything. It moves your focus from effort to results. From your own narrow department to the performance of the whole organization. Drucker tells of a management consultant who would start every new assignment by asking the senior executives one by one, "What do you do that justifies your being on the payroll?" The great majority would answer with their authority or their effort. They'd say, "I run the accounting department," or "I have 850 people working under me." They were focused downward, on what they controlled. But a rare few would answer differently. They would say, "It's my job to give our managers the information they need to make the right decisions," or "I am responsible for finding out what products the customer will want tomorrow." These people were focused upward, on their contribution to the whole. They, Drucker says, were the ones who were truly top management, no matter how junior their title. This focus on contribution can completely transform a job. He gives a wonderful example of a new vice president at a large bank, in charge of what was considered a boring, back-office department called agency. This department handled clerical chores like keeping stockholder records and mailing dividend checks. It was all about precision and efficiency, but not much else. But this new vice president asked the question, what could this department contribute? He realized that his work brought him into direct contact with the top financial executives of the bank's biggest corporate customers, the very people who made the decisions about where to do all their banking. He saw that his department's greatest potential was not as a paper pusher, but as a sales and marketing force for the entire bank. By focusing on contribution, he turned a forgotten corner of the bank into a powerhouse of growth. Drucker explains that every organization needs contributions in 3 key areas. First, direct results, like sales in a businessman or patient care in a hospital. Second, the building and reaffirming of values. What does this organization stand for? There has to be a standard, a shared commitment. He tells a beautiful story of a new hospital administrator who, after a long meeting, thought a decision was settled, when a nurse suddenly asked, "Would this have satisfied Nurse Bryan?" Nurse Bryan had retired years earlier. She had never even been a supervisor. But whenever a decision about patient care came up on her floor, she would always ask, "Are we doing the best we can do to help this patient?" Over time, the entire hospital had adopted what they called Nurse Bryan's rule. The standard she set, her commitment to a value, outlived her and continued to make demands on people who were technically her superiors. That is a contribution of value. The third area of contribution is building and developing the people of tomorrow. An organization that can't produce its own future leaders has failed. The executive who focuses on contribution naturally develops people, because he sets high standards. He demands excellence not for his own sake, but for the sake of the task. And people, especially knowledge workers, grow according to the demands they make on themselves. So, you've taken control of your time, and you've oriented yourself toward contribution. But how do you actually deliver on that contribution? You can't do it alone. You need to mobilize the strengths of the people around you. This leads us to the third practice, making strength productive. This, to me, is one of the most profound and humane ideas in all of management thinking. The effective executive, Drucker says, knows that you cannot build on weakness. To achieve results, you have to use all the available strengths, the strengths of your colleagues, the strengths of your boss, and your own strengths. These strengths are the true opportunities. The unique purpose of an organization is to make human strength productive while making human weakness irrelevant. He opens this discussion with one of the greatest stories of leadership in American history. In the middle of the Civil War, the Union Army was struggling. President Lincoln had appointed a series of generals who were well-rounded, men without obvious flaws. And they kept losing. Meanwhile, the Confederate general, Robert E. Lee, staffed his army very differently. Every one of his generals was a man of monumental, obvious weaknesses. But Lee saw those failings as irrelevant. He knew that each of them had one area of incredible strength, and that was the only thing he used. Finally, Lincoln learned this lesson. He found a general who was rumored to be fond of drinking. A man who was certainly not well-rounded, but he was a man who knew how to plan and lead winning campaigns. His name was Ulysses S. Grant. When people complained to Lincoln about Grant's drinking, the president famously replied, "If I knew his brand, I'd send a barrel or so to some other generals." Lincoln chose Grant for his strength, not for his lack of weakness, and that decision was the turning point of the war. This is the core principle of effective staffing. You don't look for people to avoid weakness, you look for people to maximize strength. Drucker believed the very idea of a well-rounded person is a prescription for mediocrity. He said, "Strong people always have strong weaknesses too. Where there are peaks, there are valleys." The executive who is always worried about what a person can't do is a weak person himself, likely threatened by the strength of others. But, as Drucker wisely notes, no executive has ever suffered because his subordinates were strong and effective. So, how do you do this in practice? Drucker lays out 4 clear rules. First, you have to be on guard against the impossible job. These are jobs that look logical on paper but seem to defeat one good person after another. Drucker's rule is simple. Any job that has defeated 2 or 3 people in a row, even though each had performed well before, must be assumed unfit for human beings. It must be redesigned. Often, these jobs call for a mixture of temperaments rarely found in one person, like a role that requires both intense, detailed analytical work and highly empathetic, people-focused outreach. The second rule is to make every job demanding and big. This is especially true for a young person's first job. It should be big enough to challenge them and give them a chance to show what they can really do. Too many organizations give young people small, safe, unchallenging jobs, and then wonder why they lose their fire and become cynical. Drucker says, they have only themselves to blame. They quench the fire by making the young man's job too small. The third rule is that effective executives start by thinking about what a person can do, rather than what the job requires. This means they think about people and their strengths long before a position even needs to be filled. This is why traditional performance appraisals so often fail. They are designed by psychologists to find weaknesses, to diagnose what's wrong. An executive's job is the opposite. It is to find what's right. So, an effective appraisal asks 4 different questions. 1. What has he or she done well? 2. What, therefore, is he or she likely to be able to do well? 3. What does he or she have to learn or acquire to get the full benefit from their strength? 4. And finally, a gut check question. If I had a son or daughter, would I be willing to have them work under this person? If the answer is no, you know there's a fundamental problem with their character or integrity, which Drucker says is the one weakness that cannot be overlooked. The fourth and final rule is that to get strength, you have to be willing to put up with weakness. You don't get a world-class opera singer for her charming personality. You hire her because she can sing. The manager's job is to put up with her tantrums so she can deliver that performance. Demanding that people be good at everything is a recipe for a team of well-rounded, but ultimately mediocre, performers. This principle of making strength productive doesn't just apply to your subordinates. It also applies to your boss. This is the answer to the age-old question, how do I manage my boss? The secret, Drucker reveals, is that effective executives make the strengths of their boss productive. This isn't about flattery. It's about recognizing that your boss is human, with strengths and limitations. Your job is to enable him to do what he can do, which in turn makes you, the subordinate, effective. So you ask, what can my boss do really well? What does he need from me to perform? Then you present your contribution in a way that plays to that strength. Is your boss a reader or a listener? It's a simple but critical distinction. A reader needs a report to study before they can have a meaningful discussion. Talking to them first is a waste of time. A listener needs to hear you talk through the spoken word before they can grasp the issue. Handing them a dense report first is equally useless. Figuring this out and adapting to it is a simple way to make your boss, and therefore yourself, far more effective. You've mastered your time. You're focused on contribution. You're building on strength. But even with all that, the demands on you will always exceed the time you have. There are always more important things to do than you can possibly get done. This brings us to Drucker's fourth practice, the one he calls the secret of effectiveness, if there is one. First things first. Effective executives do first things first, and they do one thing at a time. This sounds simple, but it is incredibly difficult in practice. It requires the courage to set not just priorities, but what Drucker calls posteriorities, the tasks you decide not to do. This is where most people fail. They draw up a long list of priorities and then try to do a little bit of everything. The result is that nothing truly important gets the large, consolidated chunk of time it needs to be done well. Drucker tells an incredible story of the CEO of a pharmaceutical company. When he took over, it was a small, one-country firm. When he retired 11 years later, it was a global leader. How did he do it? For the first several years, he worked exclusively on one thing: building a world-class research organization. Once that was done, he turned his full attention to a second task: building an international company. And in his final years, he concentrated on developing a long-term strategy for the future of healthcare. He built a massive, successful global enterprise by having the discipline to focus on only one major task at a time. This, Drucker says, is the secret of people who seem to do so many things. They don't. They do one thing at a time, but they finish it. As a result, they need much less time in the end than the rest of us who are constantly juggling. To practice this kind of concentration, the first rule is to constantly be sloughing off yesterday. Effective executives periodically review all their programs and activities and ask a simple, brutal question: if we were not already doing this, would we, knowing what we know now, go into it? If the answer is anything but an unconditional yes, they drop the activity or at least stop pouring more resources into it. The easy things to abandon are the total failures. Everyone can see they don't work. The hardest things to abandon, Drucker warns, are yesterday's successes. These are the projects that built the company, the products that everyone loves, but that are no longer truly productive. They linger on, consuming the time and energy of your best people, who should be working on the opportunities of tomorrow. Drucker points to the chemical giant DuPont, which for decades has had a policy of systematically abandoning products and processes before they go into decline. This discipline of clearing out the old is the only way to free up the resources to create the new. This leads us to the final practice, where everything we've discussed comes together. You've managed your time, identified your contribution, mobilized strengths, and set your priorities. Now, you have to act. You have to make a choice. This is the fifth and final practice, the elements of an effective decision. A decision, Drucker says, is a judgment. It's a choice between alternatives. And it is rarely a choice between right and wrong. It is, at best, a choice between almost right and probably wrong. Now, most books on decision-making will tell you, first, find the facts. Drucker says this is completely wrong. Effective executives know that you do not start with the facts. You start with opinions. Why? Because there are no facts unless you first have a criterion of relevance. You have to have a hypothesis, an opinion, to even know which facts to look for. People who say they are starting with the facts are often just looking for the facts that fit the conclusion they've already reached. So, since you start with opinions, the first rule of decision-making is a surprising one. One does not make a decision unless there is disagreement. He tells a classic story about Alfred P. Sloan, the legendary head of General Motors. Sloan was in a meeting with his top executives and said, "Gentlemen, I take it we are all in complete agreement on the decision here." Everyone around the table nodded. "Then," Sloan continued, "I propose we postpone further discussion of this matter until our next meeting to give ourselves time to develop disagreement and perhaps gain some understanding of what the decision is all about." Sloan knew that good decisions are not made by acclamation. They are made based on the clash of conflicting views, the dialogue between different points of view, and the choice between different judgments. Disagreement is essential for three reasons. First, it is the only safeguard against the decision-maker becoming a prisoner of the organization and its preconceived notions. Second, disagreement alone can provide alternatives to a decision. And a decision without an alternative is a desperate gamble, because if it proves to be wrong, you have nowhere to go. And third, disagreement is needed to stimulate the imagination and create new, creative solutions. The effective decision-maker doesn't start by assuming one person is right and another is wrong. He starts with the assumption that anyone who disagrees sees a different reality and is concerned with a different problem. His first job is to understand that other reality. Drucker lays out 5 elements of an effective decision process. 1. First, ask if this is a generic problem or a unique, exceptional one. A generic problem always needs a rule, a principle. Most of the problems an executive faces are generic. Treating them as a series of unique events is the most common mistake in decision-making, leading to frustration and futility. 2. Second, you must define the boundary conditions. These are the specifications the decision must satisfy to be effective. What are the minimum goals it must achieve? If the decision doesn't satisfy these conditions, it will be ineffectual, no matter how brilliant it seems. 3. Third, you have to think through what is right, not what is acceptable. You'll have to make compromises in the end, but you can't make the right compromise unless you first know what right looks like. 4. Fourth, you must build the action into the decision from the start. A decision isn't a decision until someone has been given the responsibility to carry it out, with a deadline. Until then, it's just a good intention. You must answer, who has to know about this decision? What action has to be taken? Who has to take it? And is the action appropriate to the capacities of the people who have to carry it out? 5. Finally, the fifth element is to build feedback into the decision process to test it against the reality of events. Drucker says that military organizations learned long ago that the only reliable feedback is to go and see for yourself. An officer who gives an order doesn't just trust the reports, he goes to the front line to see if it has been carried out. In our age of data and computers, this is more important than ever. You have to get out of your office and see reality for yourself. And with that, we come full circle. These 5 practices, managing your time, focusing on contribution, making strength productive, concentrating on priorities, and making effective decisions, are not tricks or techniques. They are habits of the mind. They form a coherent whole, an integrated discipline. This is Drucker's ultimate message. Effectiveness is not something you are born with. It is a set of practices. And practices can always be learned. Commentary. As we step back and look at The Effective Executive, it's astonishing to realize it was first published in 1967. In a world that is obsessed with the latest productivity app, the newest life hack, the next big thing, Drucker's wisdom feels more urgent and relevant than ever before. Why? Because he doesn't offer us tools, he offers us a mindset. Our modern world screams for our attention. It pulls us in 1,000 different directions, promising that if we just get more organized, if we just find the right system, we can finally get everything done. Drucker's quiet, profound wisdom offers a different path. He tells us the goal is not to get everything done. The goal is to get the right things done. And that is a fundamentally different challenge. For me, the most powerful and liberating idea in this entire book is that effectiveness is a discipline that can be learned. It's not a gift reserved for a select few. It's not about personality. The quiet introvert can be just as effective as the charismatic extrovert. This is an incredibly democratic and hopeful idea. It means that the ability to make a real impact is within reach for every single one of us, provided we are willing to do the work, to practice the habits. The concept of setting posteriorities, of deciding what tasks not to tackle, is a true superpower in the 21st century. We live in an age of infinite choice, infinite information, and infinite demands. The person who succeeds is not the one who can juggle the most balls, but the one who has the courage to let most of them drop, so they can focus on the 1 or 2 that truly matter. That requires courage more than intelligence, and it is a lesson that can change the entire trajectory of a young person's life and career. And finally, the idea of making your boss's strengths productive is a secret key to success that is almost never taught in school or in the workplace. Young, ambitious people often see their boss as an obstacle to reform or a limitation to overcome. Drucker shows us a better way. See them as human, understand their strengths, and frame your own contribution in a way that allows them to shine. When you make your boss successful, you create the conditions for your own success. It is a profound shift from a mindset of conflict to one of contribution. So, how can you, as a young person on the cusp of your adult life, begin to apply these timeless principles right now? It doesn't require a grand plan. It starts with small, simple actions. First, just for 1 week, I challenge you to track your time. Carry a small notebook or use an app on your phone, and just be an honest observer of where your hours go. At the end of that week, look at the record and ask yourself, is this how I wanted to spend my time? That single act of awareness is the first step toward taking control. Second, the next time you have a big school project or a task at a part-time job, take 2 minutes before you start and ask Drucker's question, what is the single most important contribution I can make to this effort? This will shift your focus from simply getting the task done to delivering real value, and people will notice the difference. And third, identify one thing that you are naturally good at, something that seems to come a little easier to you than to others. Maybe you're a great writer, a clear communicator, or a natural organizer. Find one opportunity this week, no matter how small, to intentionally use that strength to help your team, your class, or your family. Lean into what you do well. Peter Drucker's greatest gift was not in giving us complex theories, but in revealing the simple, powerful truths that hide in plain sight. He showed us that the people who truly shape the world are not always the most brilliant or the most talented. They are the ones who have mastered the quiet, consistent discipline of getting the right things done. They are the effective ones. And that path, with all its challenges and rewards, is open to you, starting today. That brings us to the end of our journey through the effective executive. We've explored the core ideas today, but a map is not the territory. The real value comes from walking the path yourself. If these lessons have sparked something in you, I truly encourage you to pick up a copy of the book. Reading Drucker isn't just about absorbing information. It's like having a conversation with one of the wisest mentors who ever lived. The link is waiting for you in the description below. Also, if you enjoyed this deep dive and want to continue exploring the books that have shaped leaders and thinkers, please take a moment to subscribe and give this episode a like. It tells us we're on the right track and ensures you won't miss our next exploration. Let's keep learning and growing together.